YouTube. Today we're going to talk about the maintenance on the Police Interceptor as it differs from a civilian Crown Victoria. You open your driver's door, there should be an information tag there that tells you quite a bit of information about the vehicle. First thing you want to look for is in your VIN. If it has P71, obviously that's a Police Interceptor. The last few year models, I think it was 09 to 2011, but don't get me lying there, were P7B as in boy instead of P71. Either of those are going to be the Police Interceptor. But there's quite a wealth of information on this tag. Now, one thing you should be aware of, and I point this out because it has happened to me, it's possible that your door has been replaced at some point. Perhaps there was a wreck when the PD had it or whatever. So your door tag may not match your actual vehicle, so you certainly can look at the other places where there's a VIN. For example, up on the dashboard. My particular vehicle, the VIN matches, so this is the original door. Some products are the same regardless if you have the civilian model or the police model. For example, Ford recommends 5W20. Obviously a lot of people recommend the Motorcraft synthetic blend. I've had no problems using it. I've also used other brands. I typically shop for what's on sale. Anyway, 6 quarts is the typical fill. Obviously all of these things I'm telling you, you want to double check your particular year model because Ford did change things throughout the years. Mine is a 2008, so what I'm telling you here is specific for the 2008. FL820S is the oil filter. Ironically, this also works in the Charger Hemi police car. Moving on to the coolant. I'm a big fan of this one. I use this in all my vehicles. Have no problems with overheating or anything like that. So, you know, I realize that the Ford recommends using the Ford yellow and Dodge recommends using the Dodge red or orange, whatever color you want to call it, and so forth. But I've used this in all the vehicles. No problems whatsoever. Works great. So this is what I would suggest using for your coolant. Again, the spark plugs change from year to year, so you want to double check which type yours uses. For the 2008 with the flex fuel, it came from the factory with the Motorcraft SP405, also known as the AGSF22FM1. If you're never ever running the E85 fuel, you can possibly change your spark plug to a hotter plug. However, I would caution you, I put the hotter plugs in and that's the one that popped out, so I went back to these and haven't had any problems since. For my year model, this is the transmission fluid, Mercon 5, and Mercon is the power steering fluid. Again, that's another one you want to check year to year because I believe right after mine, this became the power steering and the transmission went to the LV, and years earlier I think this was the transmission and there was a different one for power steering. This right here is called for a different fluid in the Police Interceptor. This is the main difference in your maintenance. In the Interceptor, it calls for the 75W140 in the rear axle. In the civilian models, it calls for the 75W90. Now, I don't know if this is just because they believe that if you have a police car, you're going to be driving it harder. I don't know. But I've seen people say, oh, well, I'm not using this one, I'm using the 7590. That's up to you. I'm just telling you this is what's called for in the Police Interceptor owner's manual, and that is a difference from the civilian model. So if you're changing out your axle fluid, and I'm going to shoot a video on that soon, I'm dreading doing it, but it's time, 100,000 miles, so this is what I'm going to be using. Last but not least, .3 brake fluid. As far as I know, that's used in every year model, civilian and police. 32-ounce bottle is approximately what's needed to do a complete system flush. I shot a video showing how to do it. It's real easy. It's real quick if you got two people, but you can do it by yourself, just a little bit more effort. Probably the most controversial topic by far that I see on Facebook and elsewhere online is the whole idea of a cop chip. Here's the CPU for the car. There's going to be somebody out there that's going to argue that it is a cop chip, and of course most of us are going to say no, it's not a cop chip. So here's the thing. This is programmed a little bit more aggressively as far as shift points and so forth, and perhaps even the tuning. But by and large, it's basically the same motor in the civilian and the police car. Very subtle differences. The police interceptors don't produce monster horsepower or anything like that. They do slightly out accelerate the civilian model. A lot of that has to do with the gearing. Typical civilian model is going to come with a 273 rear end. Typical police interceptor is going to come with a 327 or a 355. What that means is that's the number of turns of the drive shaft to produce one turn of the rear wheels. So 3.55 turns of the drive shaft to turn the wheels once gives more acceleration and the illusion of more torque than 2.73 turns. The best way I can describe that is if you've got a bicycle that has gears that you can shift, you'll notice it's easier to get going when you have a gear that requires you to push the pedals a lot of times. You shift gear to one that spins the wheel more than the pedals. It's a lot harder to get going, but obviously once you're going, it's easier to keep going. The other thing about these is the speed limiter. Some years I believe there's not a speed limiter, and other years it's much higher than the civilian model. And typically when they have a speed limiter, it's because of the drive shaft not being rated to handle the speed, so they limit it here. So quick tour of the engine. There's our CPU. There's your brake master cylinder. That's where you would fill if it's low on fluid. Obviously you should not be low on fluid. If you have a leak, that's a problem. The fluid will go down a little bit when your brake pads wear out. It's kind of one way to know if your brake pads are wearing out. And then obviously, instead of topping off the fluid, if you change the brake pads, it will bring the fluid back because the thicker pads push out on the calipers, which brings the fluid back here. There's your air cleaner. Your air filter's inside of there. Just past that is the mass air sensor. It's slightly different on the older models, obviously. If you've seen my spark plug video, I have a picture of what the 03 looks like. There's your throttle body. There's your power steering reservoir. And like I said, it's interesting because it's not power steering fluid anymore. These use automatic transmission fluid there. But again, you always want to check your owner's manual because every vehicle is different. But most of the vehicles that I've been dealing with and doing maintenance on are using automatic transmission fluid instead of power steering fluid there. There's your windshield washer fluid reservoir. There's your coolant reservoir if you needed to top off your coolant. Obviously you want to do that cold. Just turn this cap and put it in there. There's your air conditioner high pressure hose. And there's your air conditioner low pressure hose. oil fill cap. And right next to it should be your PCV valve. And there's your oil dipstick. And just across, there's your transmission dipstick. Then with the belt, that is your power steering pump there, your alternator there. It's the crankshaft at the bottom there, water pump there, and your air conditioner down at the bottom. That is your tensioner there. If you stick a 3/8 socket wrench into there, you can turn this to take pressure off the belt if you're going to change out the belt. Your wiper blades are both 22-inch. I haven't found any advantage to spending more money on wiper blades, so if you have found a blade that seems to be worth spending extra money, leave a comment. Probably the other big controversy that I see discussed online is what sort of gasoline to use. Now, my particular model will accept E85, which is 85% ethanol. It'll also accept gasoline, or what we might typically call E10, is most of the gasoline sold in America is 10% ethanol and 90% gasoline. If you're lucky, you may have a station nearby you that sells ethanol-free gas. I just ran a tank of ethanol-free and I'm going to post a video about how that worked, and we'll see. But anyway, the other issue more commonly discussed besides whether or not to use the ethanol is what octane. Crown Victoria calls for 87 octane, which is the quote-unquote regular gas, and there's really no reason to vary from that, just like there's no reason to vary from the other recommended fluids. I'm not going to get into all the specifics because it would take a long time, but obviously the Police Interceptor major difference is the suspension brakes. So the brake pads and rotors are beefier on the police car and the suspension is tougher. And that's where these cars really shine compared to their civilian counterparts, is braking and handling. But I will post up what the pads are for front and rear. And I've also got a video coming. I've got some higher performance pads we're going to put on and test out and see if there's any improvement in the braking. So be looking for that.